Thank you, Julie. Good morning, everybody. Oh, bleary night last night. Welcome back, and good to see you all here, looking bright and shiny, if I may say. So the next speaker probably doesn't need much introduction, but you're going to get one from me anyway. He is the MP for Croydon South, where he's been the MP for over 10 years now. He was a minister in the Home Office for 4 years, and 2 of those as policing minister, where he gained very quickly a reputation for doing the detail. In fact, I remember within days of him being appointed as policing minister, he was on the phone to many PCCs, and it was very, very quick where he got well over his brief. It didn't take long, and we were thrilled for that. He definitely has a passion for this role and policing, and he brings a real energy to the role as well. Many of you will know he has had a particular focus on technology, and even the Home Secretary yesterday recognised his passion for focus on technology, particularly facial recognition. And of course, we spent most of yesterday talking a lot about technology in policing and how it's going to change things. So I think for me, the real point of interest, though, are his socks. And I'm absolutely delighted to say today he has not disappointed, so have a look at those as well. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please put your hands together to welcome my colleague and my friend, the Shadow Home Secretary, the Right Honourable Chris Philp.
Good morning. Well, Katie, thank you for that introduction. I feel I should start by just confirming that I am, as usual, wearing Union Jack socks, which, when I was sitting on the government front bench in government, used to really wind up the Scottish Nationalist Party, who frequently commented on them. I'm very sorry I couldn't join your dinner last night. I hope the hangovers are not proving too oppressive this morning. Thank you for the warm welcome again. Great to see so many friendly and familiar faces here this morning. And as Katie said, I'm really delighted to be re-entering the policing world after a gap of just 4 months. I've certainly missed you all. I hope you've missed me too. We will, thank you, Katie. We will find out in due course. Look, my time as policing minister in the Home Office, I think, were among the best years I spent in government. Now, I know that did include a spell as Liz Truss's Chief Secretary to the Treasury, so the bar is not hugely high. But those years as police minister were definitely the best I spent in government. And so I'm looking forward enormously to my new role as Shadow Home Secretary. And I certainly intend to work constructively with policing leaders, with police and crime commissioners, and indeed the government in the national interest. And in fact, when Diana Johnson was appointed as my successor as police minister, I made a point of spending some time with her, sort of handing over some of the projects that I'd been working on, including live facial recognition. I understand most ministers, most outgoing ministers, don't do that, but I was keen to make sure she had the best possible chance to make a success of the role, because it is in our national interest to do that, regardless of which political party is in government. But of course, as you would expect, and as my constitutional role requires, I will also hold the government robustly to account if they fall short or, heaven forbid, fail to keep any promises which they may have made. Now, I know there have been some serious challenges in the last year for policing. Difficult protests and riots on our streets. The unrelenting glare of media scrutiny and often ill-informed social media commentary. We have seen some horrific murders, and we've seen vile hatred expressed towards some of our communities. And of course, violence against women and girls remains at unacceptable levels. But the challenges of our times are exactly why what policing does is so important. Because the safety of the public is the first duty of government, and there are few jobs more fundamental to the functioning of our society than the jobs which the people in this room do. And that is why I would like to start by saying thank you. Firstly, thank you to our 43 police and crime commissioners, and congratulations on your elections last May. I can honestly say, following recent painful experience of elections, that I fully appreciate how difficult elections can sometimes be. Police and crime commissioners play a vital role in providing systems leadership, in policing and beyond, setting strategic priorities, acting as the voice of the public, and of course holding policing to account for delivery. So thank you, Donna Jones, for your past year as APCC Chair, and congratulations, Emily, on your recent appointment. I look forward to working with you. And thank you also to Gavin, who I can see here, and your team at the NPCC, and thank you to the operational police leaders here with us for your dedication and commitment. But I think most importantly of all, thank you to the 150,000 officers under your command for the work they do every day to keep us safe. Whenever an officer puts on the uniform or says goodbye to their family to go to work, they put themselves at risk in a way few other professions do. So I would like to particularly thank each and every police officer for the dedication and sacrifice which they make on behalf of the rest of us. We are grateful. I am deeply conscious of the officers who have made the ultimate sacrifice by giving their lives in the line of duty. And during my time as police minister, I met many bereaved families. And in my own borough, Croydon, in South London, I recently attended the unveiling of a memorial for Sergeant Matt Ratana, who was killed in the line of duty by a suspect who had been detained at the Windmill Road Custody Centre, a tragedy which touched our whole community in Croydon. This reminds us of the sacrifices made every day, and it's therefore right that a few months ago we were able to announce the new Elizabeth emblem, recognising police officers and other public servants who lost their lives in the line of duty. And it's fitting that among the very first recipients of that emblem just a week or two ago were the families of police constables Fiona Bone, Nicola Hughes and Andrew Harper. I know we will never forget their sacrifice. Now, given everything I just said, it is vital that the public and politicians back the police when you act to protect us and to catch criminals. The police often have to use force to detain suspects, conduct stop and searches, engage in high-speed pursuit, use tactical contact, and occasionally discharge a firearm. I believe it is strongly in the public interest to ensure that the police officers on the ground have the confidence to always act decisively when needed, of course within the law and in line with training. Now, I was concerned as police minister, and I'm still concerned today, that we are not getting the balance right. Many officers I've spoken to, whether it's firearms officers at the Gravesend Centre for the Met, through to frontline officers up and down the country, feel that their reasonable use of force or other police powers is treated disproportionately or unreasonably after the event in a way that doesn't reflect or recognise the pressures of dealing with an incident or the split-second decision-making which is inevitably required. And some incidents go into lengthy and bureaucratic IOPC investigations or even prosecutions where common sense says that is not appropriate. And that doesn't serve the public interest because it means police officers on the front line may hold back from taking the action they need to take to catch criminals and keep the public safe. Now, I'm sure Sergeant Martin Blake will be in our minds now. A criminal prosecution hung over Sergeant Blake for 2 years following the shooting of violent gang member Chris Cabba, who at the time was attempting to ram police officers with his car. Having heard all the evidence, a jury acquitted Sergeant Blake in less than 3 hours. And as a South London MP, I'm also very mindful of the case, another illustrative case, PC Paul Fisher. In February 2020, he was driving an unmarked police car to the scene of a frenzied knife attack on Streatham High Road, being committed by recently released convicted terrorist Sudesh Aman. Rushing to the scene, as you would expect, PC Fisher crashed, causing minor injuries to a third party. But absurdly, he was prosecuted for dangerous driving. Now, a jury acquitted PC Fisher, as you would expect, and he was exonerated by the IOPC. But that process took nearly 4 years. And that, I think, is deeply unfair and deeply unreasonable. We need police officers on the front line to be prepared to take the lawful action necessary to protect themselves and the public. We need them to drive quickly to the scene of an attack by a terrorist to save lives. We need stop and search to be used to take knives off our streets. We need force to be used where necessary, to detain suspects. And I'm concerned that officers are losing the confidence to exercise those powers as required to keep the public safe. So that is why, in the previous government, we developed proposals to address the issue, including anonymity for firearms officers who are prosecuted, a higher threshold for IOPC referral to the Crown Prosecution Service, faster and more common sense IOPC investigation processes, and a change to the standard required for a successful defence to misconduct proceedings. Now, the new government, I'm pleased to say, is taking forward much of this work, and the new Home Secretary will have my full support in developing those proposals. I also have confidence that the new Director General of the IOPC, Rachel Watson, who I was closely involved in appointing, understands these issues. I think she understands the problems that I've just described. And I'm confident that under her leadership, the IOPC will take a more proportionate and reasonable approach to these issues. But I urge the government to go further. I believe that it should be a defence to both misconduct proceedings and also a defence to any criminal proceedings if a police officer can show that the way they acted followed materially their training or standard procedures in the way they exercised their powers. And I think that would really help give officers the confidence to use those powers to protect the public. So I call on the government to make that change. I've said that before. But if the government doesn't make those changes, then at the next opportunity, as the Shadow Home Secretary, I will seek to introduce those measures as an amendment to the next piece of legislation that goes through Parliament. And I hope that will assist officers on the front line and the operational police leaders here with us today. Police officers take risks to keep us safe, so we should make sure they are always treated reasonably and fairly in return. Let me now say a word about funding, often a popular topic at events like this. I don't think I've had a single meeting with Mark Rowley in the last 2 years when he hasn't mentioned funding. As Police Minister, I always tried to get as much money as possible to you in the front line. In the current financial year, which we're in now, it's a budget which I set as Police Minister just under a year ago, we saw a £922 million increase in funding compared to the previous year, well above inflation. Now, I understand yesterday the Home Secretary talked about a £500 million increase for next year. Now, the eagle-eyed amongst you will have noticed that is only half, roughly half, the increase which the last government provided to you for the current financial year. So I'm disappointed, I'm sure you are too, that the funding increase is not as big as the funding for next year, is not as big as the funding increase that you had this year. And I'm sure that in the next couple of months, as the government finalises the police funding settlement, that police and crime commissioners and chief constables will want to join me in asking the Home Secretary to do a bit better. I'm sure she can match what we did last year. Now, in terms of police numbers, we had the most recent police officer number figures came out in July, which related to the March 31st sort of waymarker, and we hit, in terms of headcount, 149,769. That is an increase on the previous year, and it is a record ever number of police officers. For some reason, the new government decided not to trumpet that as loudly as I would have liked, but it is a record ever number and a further increase. It's 3,000 more than the previous peak in 2010. So I hope the new Home Secretary will commit to, at the very least, providing funding to maintain those record officer numbers, and I hope even grow them. Now, I know the new Home Secretary has some plans to make changes to neighbourhood policing, but I hope that is not done simply by compelling forces to transfer officers from other important duties, such as response or investigations, or by imposing targets with no funding, because otherwise her changes may backfire. And I'm sure police and crime commissioners, chief constables and I will be watching very closely to make sure those changes are not imposed in a way that is unreasonable. Now, I know that many forces and many PCCs also want to see the funding formula updated, a regular topic of conversation. It's been many years, of course, since that last happened, and there are a number of forces who are being very unfairly treated. Forces like Lincolnshire, Essex and Dorset, for example, have particularly unfair funding settlements. Now, I know, because I've seen it, that all of the preparatory work in the Home Office for a new funding formula has been done. It is sitting on a shelf, or probably on a hard drive, waiting to go. So I urge the new government to get on and bring that forward as we had intended to, with, of course, protective transitional arrangements to make sure no one loses out as the transition is made. But regardless of funding and police officer numbers, it's vital that we use officers' time effectively to protect the public and catch criminals and not spend it on other extraneous activities. So I hope that Right Care, Right Person is continuing to be rolled out to ensure that mental health work where there is no criminality and no threat to public safety is done by the NHS and not by the police. I hope the work to automate redaction and ideally eliminate redaction in relation to cases that are not going to be charged by the CPS is continuing. And I very much hope, Gavin, that you and the MPCC are continuing to work with Stephen Parkinson, the Director of Public Prosecutions, to make DG6 more reasonable. I have to confess, in all honesty, I tried quite hard during my 2 years to get that sorted out with Max Hill, the previous DPP, and Stephen as well. And if I'm honest, I did not have any success in getting that sorted out. So that was one of the things I wasn't able to do. But I hope, Gavin, that you and your colleagues and PCCs can have more success in the coming year than I managed to have in the last one. If we can get that made more reasonable and more proportionate, it would save a huge amount of police officer time. Now, I also listened to the speeches yesterday about the plans for the creation of new national policing bodies, the reform programme, and moving some national capabilities from one home to another, and, as I understand it, emerging proposals to move money and responsibilities from local police forces to a potential new national body. Now, of course, I'll study those plans carefully when they're brought forward, and they'll no doubt be debated inside and outside Parliament. Now, there are undoubtedly some things that can be better done nationally and require better coordination, the National Police Air Service being an obvious example of that. But I would also just offer a word of caution, an urge to be careful and thoughtful about this, and to be thoughtful before creating new bureaucracies, because national bureaucracies do not always work well. I mean, the NHS, for example, probably doesn't work as effectively as we would like it to, and that is essentially a national bureaucracy. And we should also be mindful that organisational changes cause certain extra cost, inevitably, as they're created. They certainly create distraction from core work, but don't always deliver the benefits expected. And I wouldn't want to see locally accountable police and crime commissioners or chief constables emasculated or having their funding unreasonably cut. So I think it's just worth being quite thoughtful and quite careful about how proposals are constructed, and I'll certainly scrutinise them in Parliament and outside with those thoughts in mind, because I do think, for many things, the local policing model, 43 forces with their chief constables and police and crime commissioners, are important, and I don't want to see them undermined. Now, I'd like to say a word about trust and confidence in policing. I know that the police operate in an increasingly difficult and fraught environment amidst community tensions and the swirl of merciless and often inaccurate media and social media commentary. So I know it's a very difficult environment to work in. It's a really tough job, and that has been very apparent with the debate in recent days. So it's vital the police command the respect and confidence of the public, because without that respect and confidence, it's impossible for you to do your jobs keeping our communities safe. Policing is only possible with consent. And I believe there is some more work to do in order to ensure that this is unequivocally the case. I mean, firstly, as we discussed, I think, last year, where misconduct arises, it must be swiftly dealt with. Chief officers need more power to act quickly and decisively instead of getting tied up in convoluted and bureaucratic processes involving legally qualified chairs to dismiss officers who do not meet the required standards. And I know changes are in process to do exactly that. Secondly, and most importantly, to command trust and confidence, it's vital the police concentrate on what really matters to the public. Now, it's very welcome that overall crime has in fact fallen substantially and has been for some years. We don't really say that enough. When you talk to the public in public meetings, they often say, oh, crime's going up, it's out of control. But when you look at, and that's partly fueled by social media, it's partly fueled by the way the mainstream media report on crime, only ever focusing on the bad news. But in fact, the overall crime levels, including fraud, according to the Crime Survey of England and Wales, which according to the ONS is the most reliable source of long-term crime trends, over the last 7 years, total crime has fallen by 18%. And homicides today are lower, thankfully, than they were 15 years ago. I think last year it was 590, 15 years ago it was 620. So despite a rising population, there are fewer homicides now than there were. And I think that is something we need to do a better job at communicating to the public. Because when I say that to my constituents in Croydon, they sometimes don't believe me. They say, oh, crime's going up. But it's not. It's actually going down overall. But the public, I think, want more than just falling crime. They want to see crimes solved. Because to a victim, there is no such thing as a minor crime. A phone stolen, a car broken into, a home violated by burglary, a shopkeeper's livelihood ruined by organised or persistent shoplifting. For those victims, these are all serious crimes. And just as with the most serious offences, the public expects action. And most fundamentally, the public expects the criminal perpetrators of these crimes to be caught and prosecuted. And the truth is that not enough crimes are currently being solved. If there's one thing I think we should collectively focus on, it's getting that figure higher. So whether it's shoplifting or whether it's rape and serious sexual assault, I think we need to collectively do a lot better. Last year, only around 8% of reported crimes were solved, and 8% is simply not enough. It means that 92% of reported crimes weren't solved. So to build public trust and confidence, that number needs to be a lot higher. Now, the commitment that policing made last year via the MPCC, and thank you again, Gavin, for that the police would always, not sometimes, but always follow all reasonable lines of inquiry, must be delivered in practice. And I'm glad that the Inspectorate, under Andy Cook's leadership, is going to be inspecting on that basis. Following all lines of reasonable inquiry, not sometimes, but always. And if we can get those detection rates rising, confidence and trust in policing will invariably rise with them. That is what the public expects. And anything that distracts from that mission, I think, should be jettisoned. Which brings me to the topic of the week, non-crime hate incidents. Now, in my view, the police should be concentrating on investigating and preventing crime. And where speech or actions don't meet the criminal threshold, in my view, it should only attract the attention and time of the police, where criminality is likely to imminently follow. That is quite a high bar, and in practice, not one that is currently always being followed. Offensive speech is not the same as illegal speech. The police are not here to police thought. You're not the thought police. Non-crime hate investigations should not trespass upon free speech. They should not be directed at 9-year-old children involved in playground spats, as reported in the Times last week, or at journalists discussing trans issues, such as Julie Bindel. So I think the non-crime hate incident guidance should be rewritten and updated urgently to ensure that only where there is a real risk of imminent criminality, the police should get involved. Now, that is currently the threshold for recording personal data. That was set out in revised guidance published in a statutory code by the Home Office in June of last year and reflected in APP. But I think that high threshold should apply not just to the recording of personal data, but also to whether the police spend time looking at an incident at all in the first place. So I call on the government today to urgently ensure the guidance is updated, using legislation if needed. And I call on police forces to apply common sense and not waste time and resources looking at things unless there is criminality or unless there is an imminent risk of criminality. I think that will help rebuild confidence in policing and it will free up time to spend on crime. Now, the final topic I'd like to touch on is one that Katie referenced in her very kind introduction, which is a topic people won't be surprised by. It's technology. Because I believe passionately, as I hope everybody here does now, that the use of technology has the potential to revolutionise policing and crime detection in very profound ways. We've seen it in the past. We saw almost exactly 120 years ago the first conviction secured using fingerprint evidence. 35 years ago, we saw the first conviction secured using DNA evidence, which I think was the case of Colin Pitchfork in 1988 or 1989. Now, there are new technologies now that I think will have a similarly profound impact to those two technologies of the past. Now, when I left the Home Office a few months ago, I had allocated around £80 million to be spent in this current financial year on technological innovation. That is far more than had ever been allocated before to innovation. Most Home Office tech spending is on things like communication systems, replacing and updating the PND or PNC, those kind of legacy projects. This £80 million was all for brand new projects. Now, I very much hope that Rachel Reeves, the new Chancellor, when she's not busy rewriting her CV, has not snaffled any of that £80 million. I've been asking the Home Office to confirm that the money is still there, and I haven't had a completely straight answer, if I'm honest. But the money was there 4 months ago, and I hope it still is. And that money was intended, as I say, to develop new technology. And that included the use of artificial intelligence, which is already making operations, data analysis, and communications more efficient, and has vast potential to go further, not just in making police operations more efficient, but also in analysing large data sets to identify crime patterns and even sifting through large data sets to identify specific criminals. So AI has enormous potential. I think autonomous drones operating beyond the visual line of sight has the potential to act as a first responder, to get to a scene quickly and get video footage of something, and also gather intelligence. Various American police forces, including the NYPD and the LAPD, are already using autonomous drones. That means they fly themselves. You give them the target and they just fly there themselves without needing an operator. They are already using that to get to a scene quickly and get live video feeds of crimes that are being committed or essentially tracing perpetrators as they flee. And that can now be done on an autonomous basis. Knife scanning technology is something I was also funding previously, and I hope is being carried on. So there are emerging technologies that enable officers, particularly in urban forces, to scan the public walking down a high street to see if they're carrying a knife. The technology appears to be able to distinguish between a mobile phone or a bunch of keys versus an actual knife. And that means that if you can scan hundreds of people, identify the one or two that are carrying a knife, and then do a physical stop and search, it means those stop and searches can be done with precision, rather than having to search a lot of people with the associated issues that creates. So I'm really hoping that technology, assuming that my successor is still investing in it, will be ready to trial on the streets in the early part of next year. And in places like Croydon and other urban centres, that could be revolutionary in getting knives off of our streets. And then, of course, live and retrospective facial recognition. I hope every force is getting every single video image they can from crime scenes and running it through the PND for a retrospective facial recognition match. I think we were targeting 200,000 searches this year. I really hope the Home Office are continuing to monitor that to make sure that is being used not just for some offences, but for every offence where you've got an image of the perpetrator. But I think live facial recognition, as I've said before, has enormous potential. It's been tried quite a lot in Croydon Town Centre over recent months. I got an update just a couple of days ago, and in just a few months, using live facial recognition on a sporadic basis, just once a week or something like that, it's led to over 120 arrests of criminals who would not otherwise have been caught. Matching people just walking by the camera against a watch list, which in the case of the Met is about 16,000 wanted criminals. One of the people that walked past the camera and was pulled over and arrested had been wanted for 14 years, but hadn't been arrested. There was another man who had been wanted for a double rape dating back to 2017, who walked past the camera, was identified, and then arrested. People wanted for Class A drug supply, GBH, burglary, fraud, and a surprising number of people who had failed to attend court or who had breached their registered sex offender conditions were also arrested. That is 120 arrests of people just in one town centre who would not otherwise have been caught thanks to live facial recognition. And as a result of that, I was told by Croydon Police yesterday that in the town centre where this has been used, violence with injury is down by 12% and street robbery is down by 19%. The local police think, because criminals know it's being used and therefore avoid coming to the town centre. The local superintendent who's running this, Mitch Carr, rightly describes the technology as game-changing. So I'd like to thank Chief Constable Jeremy Vaughan of South Wales, if he's here, and the Met's Intelligence Director, Lindsay Chiswick, who are the NPCC leads for this, for the work they've done, as well as Superintendent Mitch Carr for the work he's done on the ground in Croydon. I know some forces are using live facial recognition already. Essex, I know, have been using it, for example, along with South Wales and others. But if you're not using live facial recognition to catch criminals who would not otherwise get caught, this is scanning people walking down a street to match them against the wanted list, I strongly encourage you to give it a try. Lindsay Chiswick at the Met can advise on the practicalities. If you ask nicely, she might even lend you one of her vans that has the camera equipment attached to it. There is very good College of Policing authorised professional practice explaining how the technology can be used lawfully and proportionately to make sure that it respects privacy and the various legal safeguards. So providing the APP is followed, this is really effective technology that, if you use it, will enable you to catch criminals who would not otherwise be caught. So I just strongly encourage the adoption of that technology. So let me just finish by saying this. I think you all in the policing family collectively do a vital job. The functioning of our society, of our economy, and in fact of our entire civilization depends on the work you do to fight crime and to maintain order. I know there are serious challenges that we face. Tensions in our society these days are often spilling onto our streets. Social media makes public discourse less civil. Crime is becoming more complex and technology is moving fast. But I know that policing in this country will continue to rise to meet these challenges as it always has. And while I may on occasion have some constructive comments on the issues of the day and perhaps the odd word of criticism for the government, I'd like you to know that I want you to succeed in your mission. And as Shadow Home Secretary, I will do everything I can to ensure that you do succeed. Thank you.
Hello, come and take a seat, Shadow Home Secretary. You're getting used to that new moniker.
Just about. Although I was on Sky with Kay Burley this morning.